Hi and welcome to the Warhammies. It's been a little while since I made my last Darktide video, but we're finally here reviewing the new talent trees that have come with the Bound by Duty update. Honestly, these talent tree changes have been a long time coming. When the Arbitrator class dropped, it was kind of clear to see that power creep that had moved into the new talents, so it's really good to see these classes have been updated, and we're starting with the Psyker as that's where I started my Darktide YouTube journey. We won't be doing them in order they've been released, it's just kind of as and when what I've got my current class setups to be. More importantly, a really interesting thing with the new update. Look, you can now have more custom classes. Not just 5, really handy if you like me, have a few builds and you like to jump between them. So running straight in, we're going to be looking at my Stronghold build. So quickly running over the weapons and the curios, they haven't really changed. The main thing we're going to be focusing on in this video is the talents. So we've got the Mark III Shock Maul. We like this. Nice bit high voltage, nice skull crusher on there. This is all about utilizing it to knock enemies over and to stun them. This is very much a support build and focuses on allowing your team to just easily deal with those targets. Then, luckily, the Mark IV bolt pistol. There's new marks of the bolt pistol that we'll get into a later video, but we're going to be wanting puncture and lethal proximity. This is just to again do some damage to some bigger targets. For your curios, I really like running my Psyker with extra health curios, just because you can finally get them up to the base amount of health that a Zealot has. So we've got 21% max health, 20% max health, and a additional stamina. The reason I like this stamina is solely because of the fact that when combined with the blocking talent that we'll look at later that builds peril, with the more stamina we have, the less peril we generate overall, so it means we can block for longer. That's the only reason we've got it, but feel free to play around the curios as much as you want. So for the talents, let's hop into it. There have been a variety of changes, and honestly, it's really difficult now to build Psyker builds because every talent is so good. So jumping into the talents, for my Stronghold build, we're going to be looking at Quartitude, which is all about replenishing toughness for each 10% of peril quelled or generated. As you can see, that's kind of combined from the previous one because Warp Expenditure is a new talent. It's really useful. The melee weak spot kills restore 15% toughness over 3 seconds, and basic melee attacks just restore 2.5% toughness instantly. That's really good. But we're not picking it up for this build as I wanted to try and keep them as close to the original build that I made. Obviously, feel free to play around with these. It's just a baseline to work from. Then Battle Meditation, because we have to get something to work our way down, which is really just about lower penal generation, because this is, unfortunately, as some of you may hate it, my Smite Psyker build. Moving down, get the toughness boost. Then we're going to be picking up Smite. We're going to be on Enfeeble for this one. Unfortunately, Smite has lost some of its talent nodes. It used to have ones or additional ones that allowed it to jump to extra targets. However, I think that's been taken down. Unfortunately, Charge Strike, I haven't really done much testing with this, but it's the electric damage only used to do like 20 extra damage per heavy hit, which was just terrible. So then we're going to pick up the toughness damage reduction. We're going to pick up Mind in Motion for this just because it allows us to keep on smiting while we're moving, and that's really handy. And lightning speed, extra melee attack speed, always really handy to pick up. Now we can get warp splitting here, which I like, just a bit of extra cleave based upon your peril, mainly because by Crack a Bone, you could switch it out for that if you really wanted. I just like the additional cleave. Should we start knocking enemies about a little bit more, we're just going to hit a few more of them with our light attacks. But yeah, by Crack a Bone, also fantastic because of the Mark melee weapon we are using. We are going to be hitting those weak spot hits. So really handy actually to tie into this, but these are interchangeable. Just pick whichever one you want on the day. Get the critical chance and Seer's Presence. This one, we're going to be picking up Seer's Presence again to keep it in line. Yes, there are 100% better ways to build these with a little bit more meta talents, and we'll get into that when we talk about my Soulblaze Psyker build. But for now, we're picking up Seer's Presence. Psychedetics Aura, fantastic ability. It's all about lowering your cooldown regen. And then we've got Immaterial Focus. This is one of the new passives. 10% damage resistance. In addition, while at critical peril, and for 4 seconds afterwards, you are stun immune. I just like it because of the 10% damage resistance. And we're going to be at critical peril quite a bit with this build, just because of how Smite works. So, really handy, we're going to be immune to stuns. Just a Dream, once again a new talent, and while below critical peril, 25% of damage taken is converted into peril, so again, just helping with the kind of long-lasting aspect. Yes, Anticipation is now unfortunately over here. Again, you could switch these out. If you want to dodge a little bit more, 100% pick up Anticipation. Just a Dream, again, it's just something new to try. Toughness boost, Telecon Shield, this hasn't changed, neither is the Dome or the Sanctuary ability. This just allows you regen toughness while inside. So one of the key reasons when working down the tree here, there have been a few changes. Quickly build off to this range damage boost. It's not really vital, but it's the quell speed that we're going to want. Again, you could drop this for something further up, like additional dodge, if you choose to do so. This is just handy when we do hit that smite, kind of we want to drop it at that 80%, get it back down to 20. It allows us to do that quicker as part of the kind of circle for this build. Then we're going to want the stamina. Again, you have to get this one because we're going to be picking up Empowered Psionics later on. And then the melee damage boost, always handy, but the main reason we're going here is kinetic deflection. While below critical peril, blocking an attack causes you to gain peril instead of losing stamina. Now, as I mentioned earlier, with the curios, this ties in to the fact the more stamina we have, the less peril is generated. So, it's really handy, unless they have changed that recently. Don't think they have, but you gain peril at 25% of the blocked attack stamina cost. Really handy, I'd really recommend running it. And then just movement speed, because, you know, why not? You could drop this, again, if you wanted the additional dodges or something else. So, again, feel free to play around with this one. Warp Rider, deal up 20% damage, increases as your peril increases. We're going to be running at quite a high peril anyways, and then if you don't have time to drop your smite, or you pop your smite to 100% by mistake, it just means when you switch to your melee weapon, you're going to be doing 20% more damage. Minus 10% peril generation, again, really handy. Empowered Psionics, your kills have a 10% chance to empower your next blitz. Essentially, for smite, it allows it to spread faster, and it does more damage, so it can actually kill hordes. We're going to get Psychic Leeching, so essentially it replenishes more toughness to our team when we use them. Because of how this build works, with our bulk pistol, we're going to be sniping specials. We can build up those charges and use them to kind of support the team. Overpowering Souls. So the reason I like this guaranteed one on elite kills is, again, as I mentioned earlier, when you're like taking out those snipers, you're taking out ranged enemies with the bulk pistol, this will guarantee you Empowered Psionic stacks. Whereas Bio Lodestone, it's just another 5%. You already have a 10% chance. So I'd rather run with this and know you're getting them back. And then Charged Up, really handy to get. I'd strongly recommend it with Empowered Psionics. You get 3 stacks, so it means we can bank this toughness replenishment and the additional damage on our smite as we go. But that's the Stronghold build there. Not much has changed. Unfortunately, I don't have the cosmetics since jumping from Xbox to Steam, but let's move on to our next build. So next we are going to be running into my Blazeknight build. This is actually one of my funner Psyker builds that I've recently tried out with the new talents, and I love it. I genuinely love this build. The idea that your Psyker kind of standing up, I'm very much, as those who know I play tabletop, I'm a Grey Knights player, so when this sword was introduced, I fell in love with it immediately. Having a quick look at the primary, secondaries, and curios. So we're going to be running the Covenant Mark 6 greatsword. You could run the other mark if you want. I prefer this one because it's got a poke attack associated with it. It's really fun. For the dump stat, we're going to be looking at warp resistance. We want to maintain, as you can see, our blessing unstable power there. We're going to be wanting to maintain a high level of peril constantly. So we don't want fast passive quelling. We don't want any of that. We want to just stick at a nice high level of peril, but because we're not using any really warp abilities, we're not going to be dumping over that to blow up. So the blessings, we're going to be looking at Blazing Spirit and Unstable Power. Essentially, Blazing Spirit just set fire to things with new talents. Some of the Soulblaze changes have been really handy. And Unstable Power, which is just 5% strength and scaling with extra peril. For the ranged weapon, we're going to look at the Shredder Auto Pistol. With the changes to some of the Brain Rupture abilities, this is now disgusting when you proc it. It's fantastic. So for the blessings, we're going to be running with additional critical chance for continuous fire spent on the magazine and pinning fire. So additional strength every time we stagger something. To be fair, you could probably dump the additional critical chance blessing for something else, because we now no longer need to spray this as much as possible. Because now Brain Rupture procs every 12 or 16 seconds, I think it is, automatically, you don't need to spray something really fast anymore. So really, really handy weapon, especially when you're just whipping it around, shoot a sniper, and it pops their brain immediately. For the curios, I'm just running here an additional health with some more health toughness, another health just to get that health up, and then lastly, just a additional 17% toughness. Again, for the perk here, the toughness regen speed, these are all interchangeable. I would always recommend running some additional toughness and max health just to keep you in the fight. The toughness regen here, unfortunately, as you can see, I'm running very low on money, so I haven't had time to play around with it. Moving on to the talents. As I said, very similar, trying to keep these builds in touch with how they previously were. So firstly, we're going to get Quietude, which replenishes 4% toughness, 3% peril quelled and generated. Again, we're going to be running Scry's Gaze with this build, so really handy to keep our toughness up. Realistically, I might have a look at dropping a point because warp expenditure on this one, because you're going to be melee attacking everything all the time, and a lot of the chance you're probably going to be poking things heads off. It's a really good way of keeping your toughness up there, and just every basic melee attack when we're fighting into hordes. might have a look at picking something up, but this is another really good one. If you have a spare point to spend, if you do remove something else, get warp expenditure. Perilous Combustion. Reason I like this one is because we want to be spreading our Soulblaze. Again, for the theme of this build, we are a melee kind of flame fighter. Get the toughness boost. We're going to get Brain Rupture here. We're not really going to be using Brain Rupture because what we want is Kinetic Flare. Now, Kinetic Flare has had some changes. It now only activates against specials, elites, monstrosities, and has a 100% chance to activate on hit for the target. It can't occur while at critical peril, and has a cooldown of 12 seconds. That means every 12 seconds you can just whip out your auto pistol, spray into a sniper who's far away in the distance, you hit them once, and it pops them immediately. It's really fun to use now. Toughness damage reduction. We're going to be picking up quickly lightning speed. Additional melee attack speed for this build is vital. The sword is very slow. Then we're going to get Soul Drinker. Killing an enemy with Soulblaze restores 15% toughness over 5 seconds and grants additional critical hit chance for the duration. Yes, you could potentially look at this one as well, but unfortunately I built some of those into my other builds, so I like to keep things slightly separate. Wildfire. Wildfire has had some changes. When killing an enemy affected by Soulblaze, nearby enemies each gain up to 4 stacks of Soulblaze. They cannot gain more stacks than the dying enemy had. I've heard Wildfire has had some changes. I haven't really run it through testing myself, but we'll have to wait and see. So we've got the critical chance here. Now, you could go down and get Precedence here. I probably recommend it if you really want to set things on fire with your sword, but I've just gone for Kinetic Presence for the extra pokey damage on the thing, because that's just standard. Critical hit chance, yes, you're kind of playing with fire, might work sometime, might not. Just additional 7.5% elite enemy damage is always handy. Psykinetics Aura, we want this one because we're going to want to be running in Scry's Gaze majority of the time. We're going to need this. We're going to need to pick up Anticipation for this build. A lot of people tend to forget. So my Blaze 4 sword, mobility, I like it high. Mainly because this thing is really difficult. You only have 3 dodges now, and they're really hard to work around. So having an additional dodge is really handy, and increasing that duration allows you to stay in the fight longer. There's Just a Dream, so while below critical peril, 25% damage taken is converted into peril. I quite like this one, just for some additional kind of damage resistance. Yes, you could look at Immaterial and Focus, which, again, you could switch these two out for one another, or jump up and get the toughness regen. It's your choice. Here we've got a 25% toughness boost, and we're going to pick up Scry's Gaze. So with Scry's Gaze, the main one we really want is warp speed on this, just to get that additional movement speed so we can kind of zip around enemies a little bit more. You've got Precognition here and Reality Anchor. So these are dependent on how you want to run this build. Precognition I quite like. I know the initial build ran Reality Anchor, but there's some changes on here I kind of like the look of. So what we're going to be doing is looking at Precognition here. I prefer this one just because the finesse damage, this sword does quite a bit. 30% extra finesse damage is quite a lot of damage, and with some of the changes to kind of peril generation and quelling with the weapon, we're going to be getting to that most of the time. But Reality Anchor, fantastic. You don't want to have to worry about this. If you don't want to have to worry about making sure it's kind of low all the time, you could just run Reality Anchor. Obviously, this does increase your damage and things like that, so it depends if you want Scry's Gaze up for longer, or you want to kind of run the high risk, high reward. I like this just because you get the extra damage. Get the extra melee damage here, and the stamina boost. Now you'll notice there's some new changes here in front of Empowered Psionics. Firstly, Vulnerable Minds. We're going to be getting this so we can do additional damage to Ogryns and Monstrosities. This sword can do a lot if you headshot something, especially with Scry's Gaze and finesse buffs, so being able to do 20% additional damage on top of that is fantastic. Warp Rider, 20% damage, increases your peril increases. Well, when we combine this with Warp Ghost, new ability, we have minus 80% passive quelling, 2% additional stamina, and plus 25% toughness replenishment. Well, this not only helps us replenish toughness, but the passive quelling is what we're interested in here. So when combining this with our blessing that gives us up to 20% extra damage on high peril, and Warp Rider that gives us 20% damage as our peril increases, this is going to allow us to sit in that high peril state for longer, because we're not utilizing any of the stuff that's going to require us to activate peril things at high peril. This is really good at just keeping that 40% damage buff up. So when going in here, we're getting the range damage boost. Nothing we can do about this one. We need this. In terms of Solidarity, you could get this. And the reason I like picking up Solidarity, because we haven't picked up Reality Anchor here. So you could get rid of Solidarity if you really wanted Puppet Master. But when not picking up Reality Anchor and you want to make sure you're getting to that 30% finesse buff instead from Precognition, I like to pick up this so we can quell with our sword as we're running along. Then get toughness damage reduction. And then Warp Siphon. So we all know what warp charges do by this point. Killing an enemy or specialist enemy gains a warp charge. We gain increased damage every warp charge. And every time we spend our combat ability, it lowers the regen 7.5% per warp charge. Now, important point, we need Essence Harvest here. So you could go for Inner Tranquility, but we're not bothered about peril generation. We want to just be sat nice high peril generation. So what we're interested in is more toughness regen. Replenish 30% toughness over 5 seconds on gaining a warp charge. So that means every time we kill an elite or specialist enemy, we're gaining 30% toughness over 5 seconds. And it's reset every time we kill another one. Warp battery, so we're doing more damage here. We get more stacks. And then lastly, Psychic Vampire. We're not going to get in Fire Reborn just because we don't have a way to proc Warp Fire quickly. So if we're running like Flame Staff, yeah, 100%, but Psychic Vampire here, just because as we're killing things, we're going to be generating a chance of anyone in coherency, and arguably probably a point of when you want Puppet Master, because you've got a higher chance of generating these, just because your coherency radius is larger, but again, really handy. It's interesting to see some of these new changes, especially from Warp Ghost, and how they kind of work to maintain that high level of peril. We're not interested in using the Force Sword special ability. Yes, it's fun, and yes, if you get it fully charged, use it into a crowd because it just wipes the screen, but it's not really a requirement. In terms of, obviously, your auras, you could switch it out for the extra crit chance if you want to make sure you're setting things on fire, but I didn't find it necessary. Let's hop into the next build. So moving on to my Soulblaze build. Now, for those who have been with my channel from the start, this was the very first Darktide build I did. Having a look back at that video to where I am now, it's drastic. You know, I don't think I was even monetized back then. I must have had about 200 subscribers, I think, when I made that video. So it's been interesting to come back to this. This isn't the most meta way to run this, and I will have a section at the end of the video covering what I would regard meta changes to this build. But as I said with this video, what I want to do is keep the original feel of those builds in line with when they were kind of made. So there may not be kind of the ideal meta changes, but what I want is kind of still having that class identity. It feels different, it looks different, but I will talk about a better version of this build that's kind of better at team play. But this is all about setting things on fire. So if that's what you want to do, run this. So firstly, quickly running over the weapons. This is actually the Demos Mark IV sword, the one with the extended bit at the end. And in terms of our blessings, precognition and superiority. Essentially, superiority, we gain additional strength on elite and special kill, and it deteriorates one at a time. It's really important for that. So it's not 7 seconds, you lose all your stacks. Really, if you kill 3 specials, you get 21 seconds of additional damage. Precognition, extra finesse damage on dodge. When you dodge this thing and poke something in the face, you're normally chopping their head off. So, in terms of the perks, damage against flak armored enemies, everything's running flak armor. It's kind of a bit annoying when you look at these perks, but additional, we've got the melee weak spot damage. The reason we like this is this thing is disgusting at poking weak spots. It can also knock crushers on the floor if you poke them properly, so really fun to use. And then we have our Inferno Force Staff. This also has changed its name since the start of the game. So main thing we're going to be looking at, we want low warp resistance on this, and this is because we're going to be looking at getting high critical chance. For the perks, we're going to be looking at range critical chance and damage to flak armor enemies. For the blessings, we've got Penetrating Flame, which applies 4 stacks of 2.5% brittleness for 5 seconds, stacked 16 times. You spray something with this, you're going to be hitting them with the 16 stacks. Then we've got Warp Nexus, which gain between 5 and 20% critical chance based on current level of peril. Well, this essentially allows us, if we're running at a very high level of peril, we're going to be getting a better critical chance. Now, this is really vital in making sure that we get extra Soulblaze stacks. So for those who don't know, if you do a critical attack, you apply more Soulblaze, which means you burn more things, which means things die quicker. Having a look at the curios again, feel free to play around with all of these. Max health, another max health, and I've got a stamina on this one just because this can be quite a slow build, and it's quite nice to have that additional stamina for sprinting. Onto the talents. You can see this won't have the ideal selections, and I will talk about another build, actually I'll do it straight after this, where I talk about more meta changes because we're running the same weapons and same curios. So for the classic Soulblaze build, you're going to be wanting to pick up Warp Expenditure, just so we can get some toughness regen on melee, Soul Stealer for toughness on warp kill, and Perilous Combustion, setting fire to things. This picks up all of the flame related talents. The toughness boost, Brain Rupture, Kinetic Flare, again, fantastic with the new changes, and Kinetic Resonance, because this is the only way this build can deal with far away ranged enemies. So especially if you pop your shout, you've got a quick way to then pop heads. We're going to be picking up Toughness Damage Reduction, Mind in Motion, I really like this. Depending if you kind of understand how the game and the flow with the kind of enemy swarms work, you don't really need mind in motion. I just like it because it helps me keep up with the team, especially if you're like trying to move around while peril or quelling. Trying to move around while quelling, it's really handy when you've got enemies coming towards you. You can kind of still back up at a faster rate. Soul Drinker, again, regenning toughness after a Soulblaze kill and extra critical hit chance. Wildfire, enemy dies in Soulblaze, it spreads the Soulblaze. Critical hit chance. Now again, I know you're all screaming at me to get this. I will discuss the other half of this build and what I prefer later on. But kinetic presence for this one, again, I'm just trying to keep, this is supposed to be the core Psyker when Darktide released. This was the build. So I'm trying to keep it in line as much as possible. Psykinetics Aura, again, regen. One with a warp, toughness damage reduction based on peril. We're going to be sitting quite high peril, so it's really handy. And Anticipation. Anticipation is just a really useful ability, just because we get additional dodges. Toughness boost. Venting Shriek. Venting Shriek hasn't really changed. We shout an enemy, we quell some peril, it knocks them all down. There's also Becoming Eruption, which Venting Shriek decreases peril generation by 1% for each enemy hit, stacking 25 times. So this is really handy when we use the shout and we want to then burn more things, when we're going to be able to use our flamethrower for longer at a higher level of peril to get a higher critical chance. And then lastly, Creeping Flames. The higher level our peril when we use it, the more stacks of Soulblaze we apply. One thing I just wanted to quickly discuss is Warp Rupture. Venting Shriek decreases the damage dealt by enemies by 10% and increases damage taken by 10% for 8 seconds. This is a really handy ability, and it's really nice to see they've changed it, because it only used to do 100 to 200 damage per enemy. This now allows it to, if you have a horde of crushers and you shout at them, they're not only doing less damage, they're going to be taking more. Really handy at helping other team members hit breakpoints, so a really nice way to see that kind of Venting Shriek has been turned into a bit of a support ability. I would have rather had it potentially shout all around you instead, but I like the idea of this. Range damage boost, we're going to be using our staff most of the time. 1 stamina, and the only reason we're going here is to pick up Warp Rider. Just because we're going to be sitting at a high level of peril, it's always nice to doing more damage. Then Solidarity, we're going to be increasing our quell speed. Really handy at trying to maintain that fine level of high peril. Toughness damage reduction, and Penetration of the Soul. I like picking this one up when running Flames, mainly just because it allows our Flame staff to do a little bit more. Then we have a look at Warp Siphon. Again, we've already discussed what Warp Charges do, but you get more damage. They help sort your recharge when you use it, so you can be shouting quite a bit when you're at max stacks of Warp Charge. In Tranquility, I like this one. Again, lowering our peril generation reduction for each Warp Charge had. Really handy. Warp Battery, we can store up to 6 Warp Charges. And lastly, in Fiery Born, killing an enemy with Soulblaze has a 10% chance to grant you a Warp Charge. So when combining this build all together, again, this is one of the classic Darktide builds. It's all about just shouting at things, setting them on fire, burning with your flamethrower, and anything tough and armoured you come up to and you poke with your Demos Force Sword. It's a really nice build, and it's very classic in terms of it kind of reminds me when Darktide came out, and each class really only had one build associated with it. We're going to quickly jump into what I would consider a more meta way to run these talents, and something that I would normally use in Havoc. As you can see, the blessings are pretty much the same. Again, you could switch this out for toughness if you wanted. It's the same weapons, as you can see. But in terms of the talents, there's a few little changes we're going to be running. So firstly, we're going to be picking up Metal, mainly because this whole build is all about doing critical chance and critical damage. So really, if you want to kind of have a look at how my Soulblade builds has kind of developed over the years with the kind of talent tree changes and kind of a better understanding of the game, it's interesting to see from kind of where it started to where we are now. But for the passives here, we've got Metal, so critical hits replenish some toughness and give us additional movement speed. Soul Stealer for warp attack kill regen. Perilous Combustion, again, burning things, going to get toughness. Brain Rupture here, again, brain just doing brain burst, doing more damage. Kinetic Flare, because it's a fantastic change with the new flamethrower. When you're spraying a crowd, it will only kill those priority targets. Really, really handy. We're not going to be picking up Kinetic Resonance. I'm not bothered by that because there are better things to pick up later in the tree. Toughness damage reduction. I like having the additional melee attack speed. Really, really handy. We're also going to be getting Soul Drinker here. We need to pick up Soul Drinker and Wildfire just because they blend very nicely with our talents. Unfortunately, we're not going to get Mind in Motion, but we're going to go down and get the critical hit chance. Another bit of critical hit chance. Now, we're going to be picking up Empathetic Evasion. So this is really handy. So whenever we get a critical hit, it makes us counting as dodging range attacks for 1 second. When we're sat at a high level of peril and out in the open, it's a really handy way of surviving. We're going to get Psykinetics Aura. I would strongly recommend picking this up in any Psyker build because it's very powerful. Anticipation as well, because of the additional dodge, really, really handy. Just a Dream, while below critical peril, 25% of the damage taken is converted into peril. So this is very much, if we take that weird hit, you know, it's not going to do as much to us, just helps our survivability. Toughness, Telekin Shield, and we're going to be getting the Dome with Sanctuary just to assist us. So the reason for this build and how this works, and kind of when I talk about that development from the initial, the other Psyker build is all about setting everything on your screen and fire. It's great, but it struggles in higher level content with bigger ranged enemies. This is when I kind of developed into this one, which is what I prefer to use, because it's all about kind of supporting your team, dropping your shield, moving up, spraying with your flamethrower, and really, when you combine Warp Siphon with Psykinetics Aura, your ability is coming back stupidly fast, so you can get dome shields up, and sometimes if you're very lucky with your kills, you can get 2 dome shields at once. It's really funny. We're going to be a stamina boost. Unfortunately, you have to get this because we want Warp Rider again. We want to be doing more damage at higher peril. And Vulnerable Minds. We want to be doing more damage versus Ogryns and Monstrosities. Then a range damage boost. We're going to be using the Staff. You could get Puppet Master again if you want to help your team out with the critical chance. But Solidarity just to help us quell that peril. Toughness damage reduction. And then lastly, the same keystone here. Warp Siphon. We're going to be stacking that up to 6 warp charges in Fire Reborn for the extra Soulblaze and the lower peril generation. If you want additional toughness, you can get this, but you don't really need it with the shield. In terms of additional things that you could drop, Vulnerable Minds isn't vital, neither is Just a Dream. So you could, if you wanted to branch out to get kinetic deflection, you could do that to help your melee fighting. That's a kind of more developed version of the Soulblaze Psyker build, and something that I use personally kind of away from my YouTube channel, because I think I made that build nearly a year and a bit ago now. So, you know, the game has changed quite a bit since then. So this is regarding what I would say is a more updated, more kind of like catch-all build for Psyker. Let's move on to the next one. So here we have my Warp Rider build. As you can see, as I mentioned earlier, not everything is leveled up, but the main thing is you're going to want a knife here. Unfortunately, this is the only knife I've got on my Psyker class at the moment, but in reality, you actually want it with higher mobility because you're not using your knife. You don't care about your melee weapon in this build, which is why we're going to be looking at the Electrokinetic Force Staff. So for those who haven't seen my Warp Rider build, it's a really fun build. The only thing is your hand will start to hurt when playing this because you are going to be rapid firing shots all the time. This build is around the Electrokinetic Force Staff. The whole build works from this weapon. So the blessings, we're going to be running Surge, which gives us 2 shots on a primary critical hit and a 5% additional range critical hit chance. Running that with Warp Nexus, the higher our peril, the higher our critical chance. You can see slowly where this is starting to stack together, the fact we're going to be doing more damage, 2 shots, and have a silly critical hit chance. Obviously for the perks, critical strike chance and hit damage. The dump stat on the weapon we're going to be looking at is charge rate. We are not bothered in the slightest about using our secondary attack. For the curios, I'm running a max health and 2 toughness ones. The reason you're going to be wanting to run this is just to do with the fact this build is going to struggle to regen toughness if you're not getting into the thick of the fight. This is a very glass cannon build. It is fun, and I would strongly recommend playing with it. Let's hop into those talents. For the talents, we're going to be picking up Soul Stealer, which is 7.5% toughness on warp attack kill. Metal, critical hits replenish toughness and give us more movement speed. And perfect timing. Critical attacks give us more damage. You'll see in the previous build, which I'll link back to the description of this build just does a silly amount of criticals, and you will have to be looking at that toughness, because if we're not pumping out that damage, we're not regenning it. So, toughness boost, and really you can pick up any blitz you like here. We're not going to be using them as part of the build, and we're not interested in them. So I've just gone down Smite to make it aesthetically pleasing. The toughness damage reduction. We're going to get Mind in Motion here because of the level of how quickly we're going to be running this build and we need to keep in the fight. We don't want to slow down, so it's really handy to have. We're then going to get Channeled Force. Channeled Force we're not really interested in. You could get Soul Drinker, but we've got no way to do Soulblaze damage in this build. But should you be on low peril and want to make sure you're doing max damage against like a monstrosity, you could pop this and then launch loads of attacks. That's a potential way to look at it, but it's more of a necessity because we want to get Empiric Shock, which essentially means we do warp damage to someone on primary attack, we do more damage. Really, really handy. Then we get Critical Chance, and we're going to be picking up Precedence. This is to give us additional critical hit chance. Empathetic Evasion, as I've mentioned, really handy. If we're doing damage to enemies with this build, we're going to be doing criticals most of the time, probably more than 1 a second, so we can constantly dodge range damage. But the issue is you need to hit shots. So that's where anticipation comes in. Because we're not really looking at blocking or doing anything, we want to make sure that we're dodging, kind of ducking and weaving. We're not going to pick up Psychonetics Aura for this one, mainly because it's not really required. Then a toughness boost, and then Scry's Gaze. You know, Scry's Gaze, we all know it by now. We quell 50% peril, we gain 10% damage, 20% critical chance, 10% weak spot damage, 20% toughness damage, and we also replenish 2.5% toughness each second. Every second we spend in Scry's Gaze, we get more damage. While Scry's Gaze, you build up peril. Build up is temporary, slowed by killing enemies. 100% peril, Scry's Gaze ends. So we're going to pick up Reality Anchor here. I would have picked up Warp Speed, but I'd rather have the additional quelling speed than the 20% movement. Reality Anchor here, just because we're going to be losing off shots and we want to try to get that Scry's Gaze to 30. You can pick up the Finesse damage if you want to do even more, but I like this one because as we're moving, we can just keep it nice and low so we can keep Scry's Gaze active. Warp Unbound is vital for this build. It gives us essentially 10 seconds of how long it lingers for, of unlimited primary warp fire. We turn into an absolute minigun with this. Just we are being throwing, and I don't want to say the word throwing my balls around, but we're going to be launching the primary attack for the staff off a lot. And this gives us 10 seconds of uninterrupted fire. Really, really handy. Melee damage boost because we have to pick it up. Stamina boost. We're going to want Warp Rider because we want to be doing some additional damage as our peril increases. Vulnerable Minds, 20% damage versus Ogres and Monstrosities. Now, Crystalline Will. You thought I was going to miss it out, but I love the concept of this ability, and I even talked about it in a previous video. Crystalline Will, it doesn't do as much as I wanted it to do, but it's a step in the right direction. So essentially, we get 100% overload explosion damage and 25% overload explosion radius. The main point of this, we no longer get knocked down, but we still take appropriate corruption damage, and if the explosion kills an elite enemy, we don't take any corruption damage. Essentially, if we walk in there and we maybe just teeter over the edge of Warp Unbound as we're getting surrounded by enemies and we're panicking, and we go to blow up and we kill something, well, we're good. This is a nice kind of get out of jail free card for us. It's really handy, really, really is. If you don't want this because you're not worried about it, I would strongly recommend picking up Warp Ghost. Warp Ghost is a brand new ability which wasn't out when I made this build, which is actually really useful when combined with something later. So we get the range damage boost because we're going to be doing monster range damage. We're going to be wanting this quell speed in case we need to lower that, in case Scry's Gaze isn't active and we need to drop it quickly. Toughness damage reduction that we have to get. And Empiric Resolve. 40% peril generation, but 30% toughness replenishment. So we get minus 40% peril generation, so we also get the debuff of minus 30% toughness replenished. So when I mentioned if you have a spare point picking up Warp Ghosts, you notice that actually that will chop that down to a minus 5% toughness replenishment deduction. And the main thing is the additional stamina there, you can run a different curio, and we also just get less peril generation. We're going to be picking up Warp Siphon for our keystone here. Essence Harvest, because as I mentioned, this build struggles with that toughness regen. If you haven't got Warp Ghost, you need this one, and also just allows us to do more damage, which is really fun. And Psychic Vampire, because we're just going to be killing things constantly, always handy to make sure that we get Warp Charges. So that is my Warp Rider build there for you. Just a heads up, your hand's going to hurt after you run this build. Lastly, running into my Duelist build. This is a build that I think when I made it, it was back when the dueling sword was unique to the Psyker. So it was trying to kind of implement weapons that weren't used as much or kind of quite niche, because dueling sword was really powerful prior to it getting moved over to other classes. And then obviously the synergies then blew out with all the extra critical chance. But it's a fun little one. If you like kind of that nice, quick, focused fire, and again, similar to the Warp Rider build, about utilizing your critical chance to do damage, really, really handy. We're going to be running the Mark V dueling sword. I prefer the Mark V, personally. I really do. You can get the stabbing one, but I just find this is easier for me to hit my targets. Ignore the perks on this. Unfortunately, I've run out of auto dockets. So for the blessings are the main thing. We want Uncanny Strike and we want Agile. Uncanny Strike allows us to do rending against armored enemies on weak spot hit, which the reason I like this sword is because it does strike down attacks. And Agile, which allows us to refresh dodges on weak spot hits and gives us additional weak spot damage. For the perks on this, I would probably run some additional weak spot damage and potentially flak armor. You could also run carapace armor enemies just to make sure this sword is clearing them as quickly as possible. But normally flak's always a good thing to run on weapons because of the amount of enemies that have flak armor. For the heavy las pistol, well, this was the funner part of this build for me. Again, another one that's going to hurt your finger when you use it. In terms of the blessings, we've got Desperado, so increased critical chance on successful dodge, and Dum Dum, extra close range damage on repeated close range hits. So the point about this build, and something really handy to note for the perks, critical strike chance and extra damage to flak armored enemies, because most of the ranged enemies wear flak armor. This weapon is really fun when used on Psyker. It's actually the weapon that Psyker starts with. And interesting enough, the push attack on this does have a unique functionality with Psyker. If you have low peril and use the push attack, I think it can hit enemies up to 16 meters and knock them over. It's really fun. But the point about this build, it allows you to switch to your las pistol when you've got enemies charging towards you, dodge backwards and keep on firing. And because you get that increased critical chance probably on your first or second dodge, you're going to be doing loads of damage. For the blessings, I've got some additional max health on here and some additional toughness. Obviously, feel free to switch that out for stamina when you've got the dueling sword. They do run quite low on stamina sometimes. This is the best dueling sword I have. Unfortunately, I never went to remake this build in the later content just because I was too busy focusing on the other classes. But it's still a fun build to use. On to the talents. We're going to be getting metal because this whole build was essentially my gun psyker build. It's all about getting critical strikes to replenish toughness and do more damage. So critical hits replenish toughness over 4 seconds, extra damage on critical attack, so again with a las pistol that does crits all the time, really handy, and the toughness boost. Now we're going to be running a sale with this. I really like a sale on this build. Essentially you want to pick up both bits because replenishing the charge is really handy, but also ethereal shards. This is the way this build can clear hordes quite quickly. If you're a little bit worried about conserving ammo, you just throw them, especially when a sale came out. It was disgusting. Then we're going to get toughness damage reduction. We're going to be getting malefic momentum because when we're using a sail, it chews through hordes. It's a really good way to get additional damage to your non-based warp weapons and vice versa. So if you wade in with a sword, kill a few enemies, switch to your sail and throw it, they just do more damage. Mind in motion. I say this is vital for this build because you want to be moving a lot of the time. You also want the additional melee attack speed because you're going to be up close and personal with enemies a lot of the time. Now, you could get warp splitting if you want, but I prefer by crack a bone, because if we're in Scryer's Gaze, this allows us to stay in Scryer's Gaze for longer, and we're going to be looking to do those weak spot hits and kills. Get the additional critical chance, precedence for more critical chance for allies incoherency, empathetic evasion, again, similar to one of my last builds, when you're shooting with a las pistol, running towards things, you're going to be dodging attacks, and anticipation, really vital for the dueling sword, allows us to get some additional dodges. There's then the toughness boost, and then Scryer's Gaze. Now we're going to be picking up warp speed and then precognition here, mainly just for that extra finesse damage on the sword. We don't have a way to quell peril unless you pull out a sail and hold the shards, so which is why when combining it with mind in motion, you can just keep up with the team. We're not interested in warp unbound, and if you want it to maintain longer, you can get reality anchor if you don't want the additional damage. The melee damage boost, 1 additional stamina, vulnerable minds, so we do more damage against ogrins and monstrosities, which is something this build struggles with and allows the dueling sword to do more damage. Warp Rider, when we proc Scryer's Gaze up to max damage, we do more damage with our sword and gun. Kinetic deflection, again, should you be required to block something, not that you should, but if that happens, really handy way to do it. True aim is very much, I would say, if you are running the recon las gun with your gun psyker, and you've got an enemy stood still and you've got the really fast fire rate one, really handy way to apply that burn damage, especially on some of the larger, heavier damage variants. Movement speed boost. Now, I like to get tranquility through slaughter. Essentially, when we pop Scryer's Gaze, it allows us to quell peril when we shoot enemies. Really handy. Surety of arms. I'm not really a fan of this. I don't like the idea that reloading pops my peril up. I appreciate they have lowered it to 15%. I'm sure there was probably some synergies with the toughness regen that you could get, but I don't like it. Then we're going to be picking up Disrupt Destiny. Disrupt Destiny is a fun ability. Unfortunately, it's really difficult, and I don't know whether Fat Shark have fixed it yet, but the UI is a little bit bugged. So sometimes when you say you've got some stacks lasting 10 seconds, and I appreciate we've only gone to the one that goes to 15 here, they sometimes disappear. But Disrupt in Destiny, essentially, enemies get marked with a kind of blue outline as you go around. Killing them regens 25% toughness, grants 20% movement speed, and adds a precision bonus. Each precision bonus grants us 1% damage, 2% critical damage, and 2.5% weak spot damage. And that bonus stacks 15 times, and when the duration ends, one stack is removed, and the duration is refreshed. So the whole point about Disrupt Destiny, and this is why I think it then bugs into the UI, is it doesn't delete all at once. It's not like once it's run out, you've lost all 15 stacks. It's very much keep those stacks up, and you're good. Get Purloin Providence. Killing an enemy marked by Disrupt Destiny, 100% chance to instantly quell 5% of your peril. It's not vital, but it's handy because it's a really good way when you're throwing shards to get a few extra throws out because it will just pop them. Lingering Influence, really handy about maintaining that just kind of passive buff stacks. Jumps it up to 10 seconds instead of 5, so you're more likely to be sat at 15. And Cruel Fortune. Weak spot kills grant 2 additional stacks of Disrupt Destiny. Really handy at getting back up to the max 15 stacks that we're going to be wanting to sit on. But that is my Duelist build. It's a build that I really haven't managed to play a lot because I've been slowly leveling up all the other weapons and I've only really managed to get my las pistol back. But unfortunately, I'm all out of auto dockets, so I can't level these things up to 500. But yeah, that is my updated builds video. Some of the other classes have had changes, so I'm making sure to cover those too. I'll catch you in the next one.